Hello everyone.
Actually, it's a very, very interesting topic, and the idea was actually Mike's to make this conversation about the volume of arts and cultures in present day. And actually, this topic was first discussed 4 years ago on Radio 3 in London by Mike Figgis himself, and it created a huge buzz and debate on the internet. And since then, another 4 years passed, and there's probably more increase in the volume of arts and culture. And I want to pass the mic, which he already has, and leave Mr. Figgis with his very interesting perspective on the subject.
Okay. I think I'm going to stand because the armchair is actually like it's a sleeping armchair, and there are other reasons as well. Main one is I like to watch. I'm an observer. I'm a voyeur. And the reason this came about was when I was a little boy. I grew up in Africa till I was 8 years old. Very privileged white boy in Nairobi. And then when I was 8, my father went bankrupt. I think he owed so much money to various alcoholic establishments, the sort of equivalent of Soho House, Nairobi, I guess, that we actually had to flee the country under a blanket. My 4 brothers and sisters, myself, my mother, my father, and took refuge in my mother's family in the north of England, who were not a privileged white family at all. They were a kind of working class north of England family. And I was thrown from an environment where I had swimming pool, servants, a couple of cars, a lot of booze, white decadence, into working class north of England culture. Had to go to a local school in Newcastle, where the dialect is called Geordie. Geordie is actually another language. It's very similar to English, but actually it's fucking impossible to understand what they're saying. So I got the shit kicked out of me for the first 2 years, and which is a great incentive to learn a language. So I learned Geordie. So if I go back to Newcastle, I can speak Geordie like this, you wouldn't understand fucking what I'm saying like that, but you know, it's a lifesaver, you know. But one of the things I learned as a Geordie was to spot the psychopath in the room, who was going to maybe come and kick the shit out of you because you were a posh white boy. It's an invaluable tool for a filmmaker or an artist, this thing of being a voyeur, not just for the sake of voyeurism, but actually for the sake of self-preservation. So I love watching The Room. So during the last talk, I watched The Room. And it was fascinating. The first thing I did, because I'm a director and I'm a pain in the ass, was I went to the back and I said, do you want to put some lights on the speakers? Because they're silhouettes. And also they're sitting down and nobody from the middle row back can actually see them. So the audience is watching a screen which has got nothing on it, listening to people talking. And one of the speakers actually had the microphone in the wrong position, so you're getting this like poof, poof going all the time. But why doesn't someone go up and move the microphone? Why is everyone kind of paralyzed in the room? And then I started watching The Room. And I discovered that I would say 78.5% of the room was on their phone. You're all nodding, aren't you? And they were doing that wonderful thing, social media, and what we call multitasking, which I realize now isn't multitasking. You know, everyone talks about how we're in a multitasking environment. We're not, just people are on their phones all the time. That's not multitasking, that's being on your phone. And the wonder of the phone, this fucking brilliant concept by Apple, who used to be the artist's friend and now just another motherfucking capitalist organization who have world domination in their sites, God bless them, is they've designed something that has so many beeps and throbs and things in it that you're constantly being told you need to look at your phone. And then once you're on your phone, you may as well check out that other shit as well, because it's so fascinating. And one reason it's fascinating, it's bright, and it's shiny, and it's heroin. That's what it is. And you're all addicted. Every goddamn one of you is addicted, you know. And what do you do with addiction? How do you kick it, you know? I don't know, heroin is so nice, isn't it, they tell me. And you'll never get a better buzz, you know. So the world of this is actually much more interesting than most of the world that's not this, you know. So, and by the way, go ahead and multitask while I'm talking. I won't be offended. A couple of years ago, I would have been outraged. I was like, oh my God, I'm talking, why aren't they listening? Now, I accept it. It is the way it is now. And when I gave this talk, Is There Too Much Culture, 4 years ago in Liverpool for BBC, I had specific things to say, which I'll repeat. But actually, in the last 4 years, it's got so much more intense and so much more of part of our life as irreversible. And irreversible is a very, very, very important word here, because I don't think we can, and I don't even advocate that we should go back to a time when we didn't look at our phones, because you just have to accept it. And a lot of the stuff is useful. But what concerns me is that actually we can't multitask. We are quite mono, the way our brain works. And we will go to the brightest object always. Somebody did a documentary about me as a filmmaker, and they took a quote from me in which I said, the eye is the seducer. The eye is the seducer because the brain actually will take that first. It will take that first, and it will actually, although it pays some kind of attention to the other stuff, it will go for the bright, shiny image. So, you know, in the last talk they were talking about, is print dead and all this kind of stuff. I mean, of course print's not dead. Epson make great printers. If you want to print, just fucking print your print. You know, it's like, almost like, are we powerless to do what we want to do? No, we're not powerless. We don't have to do what social media tells us to do and so on. So that's my observation of the room as a kind of overture. And then I'll try and make this brief, but because I'm an observer and a voyeur, and because I am fascinated by process, like I see something and I kind of go, wow, that's really interesting. And years ago when I was working with a brilliant choreographer, Billy Forsythe, the Frankfurt Ballet, we were making a film together, and I remember watching a very bad dance piece with him, and it was terrible. It was everything that was pretentious and bad about modern culture, you know, like when you see bad work, it's unique, right? It's like, wow, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. And Billy said, you know, isn't it fascinating how we have all these choices, you know, like we could do this, but we did that. Okay, we're already on the wrong road, so how do you compensate for that? Another fork comes, you go left, we go right, go left, another bad choice, you know. So by the time you get to the end of the bad work, you've made maybe, you know, 20 wrong decisions where you had a choice. And he said, on the other hand, it's fascinating. Everything's fascinating because this process had a history. You know, so I am fascinated by culture. I mean, maybe I'm an artist, maybe I'm just an observer, or maybe they're the same thing sometimes. But I love culture. I love fashion. I love photography. I love cinema. I adore music. I particularly like literature. I like books, and maybe better than anything else, because the relationship between a book and the brain is maybe the most significant relationship that we have. And actually, we are so smart. We are so smart at reading words and language, and how language has evolved. And one of the problems with the internet is that, as they said in the last thing, you know, text has become less important. Look at the front page of any newspaper, and what is a bunch of photographs and videos. And not only that, the serious newspaper now has options. You know, do you want to see the 10 beautiful celebrities who are now ugly? Do you want to see the 10 beautiful women who have married 10 ugly men? And so on. It's on the front page of The Guardian and The Independent. You go, wow, this is a serious newspaper. So, by the way, I check it out. Because it's shiny, it's bright, and I kind of go, I wonder what they're talking about, you know. So, this loss of this, potentially this loss of this relationship with the written word and the fine part of the brain that deals with the interpretation of language is maybe we're losing that. Maybe that's not a good thing. So I would equate this, is there too much culture to the idea of global warming? And I said, we're going through a cultural warming phenomenon at the same time. And in the same way with global warming, you know, the doomsayers say it's too late. It's too late to turn it, you know, to turn it round. Meaning, let's just sit here and wait for it all to grind to a halt. And at the same time, cynically, that part of in all our brains that understands cynicism and capitalism kind of goes, yeah, you know, I participate in this problem, and you know, capitalism needs to continue because I'm not going to give up my fucking house, you know, or my car, or my fashion items, you know, because it's just too important to me, you know. Fuck the planet, I'll make some donation or something. So, you know, there's this half-hearted, but it's very hard to engage with the idea of the end of everything that we know. But the end of everything culturally that we know is definitely on the horizon for the following reason. I became obsessed at a certain point with the question, why is there so much crap on the art scene? Why is there so much bad work achieving prominence on the art scene? I found a quote from Ad Reinhardt where he said, the worst enemy of the artist is the collector, the dealer, you know, the world of capitalism. And of course, this is a factor, but it's not the real reason. The real reason is actually technology. And so I started thinking about, how did this come about that we have so much crap? Was there always this much crap? You know, if I could get back to 1852, would there be this much crap on my horizon as there is now? And the answer is no, for the following reason. Culturally, organically, we always had a system called the toilet, which is basically you eat something, it passes through, goes in that special thing invented by Mr. Cracker, and you pull the chain and it's gone. And then it kind of turns into dust eventually and you grow plants with it, right? We don't do that anymore. Because we're so in love with our crap that, like Dr. Spock would say, we just don't want to let it go. And so I kind of thought, why? Why would we want to hang on to our crap in such a way that we didn't before? And the answer is because of technology. Now, I grew up listening to blues, jazz, classical music, and one of my heroes was Louis Armstrong. I listened to a Louis Armstrong record made in 1926, something like Potato Head Blues, which is regarded as one of the great classics of 20th century music. If you don't know it, check it out. Social media, it's on YouTube. Potato Head Blues. Okay, I could talk about that for an hour, but I'm not going to. Okay. Now, if you listen to the record, it's obviously recorded on, you know, the first recording possibilities, the 78, which was a process where you played through a horn, it went onto a needle, it vibrated on hot wax, and created a record, which if you then copied and played back through a needle, through a horn, it was a representation of the sound that had been recorded. The key word here is it was a representation. It was a poetic interpretation of something that had happened in the past, right? So, to remind you of the fact that it was poetic, it had all this stuff on it, like, you know what an old record sounds like. In the same way, you know what an old movie looks like, right? It has, because it's celluloid, it has, you know, explosions of color occasionally, white, things get torn, it has scratches on it, it has dust. I mean, an interesting thing happened, you know, Jean-Luc Godard's masterpiece, Weekend. I love it, and I did the introduction of the Criterion edition of it. And they did a special screening at the French Institute. And they told me with great pride, we've got hold of a print. And I went, oh no, a print. Because it was a young audience, and they projected this masterpiece. And of course, it was an old piece of celluloid. And the audience were predominantly young. The minute they saw the scratches and the scratchy soundtrack, they did an immediate kind of thing, this is an old film. This is from long ago. And they kind of said, I find it kind of interesting, it was kind of fascinating. But the filter that had prevented them from engaging with that was the fact that it was scratchy and old. I said, no, you should have done a digital projection of a cleaned up print. I just went to see Fellini's 8.5, new print. Looks like it was shot tomorrow. And therefore, you could appreciate the images in a way because it looked like completely fresh and squeaky clean. So this idea that culture always had age built into it. A painting in 100 years changes color. A negative in 30, 40 years changes color. That's why we like black and white, because it's much more stable in a way. The image can be preserved for a longer period, but not forever. However, with digital, there is no problem. You shoot something on digital, you make as many copies of clones as you like, it will never ever change its smell. It will always look new. In 1956, round about there, Frank Sinatra, for example, recorded a massively popular album called Songs for Swinging Lovers. It was recorded at Capitol Studios in Los Angeles, and it was recorded in hi-fi. Hi-fi meant that this transition from the original crude recording system into something that was far cleaner, and then began to be recorded on tape rather than direct onto vinyl. If you listen to the recording with Nelson Riddle of that Frank Sinatra album, you listen to it digitally, you can't tell that it was recorded in 1956. It literally could have been recorded yesterday, because there's no noise. There is just a pure recording, a beautiful recording, great room, of the original recording. And so that remains, if you like, the classic album which people listen to today. Round about the same time, in the mid-50s, we have Elvis Presley, we have James Dean, we have Marilyn Monroe. Now, here's a question. When I was in my first rock band with Brian Ferry, name drop, his first band in Newcastle, the band that became Roxy Music, we very consciously dressed in a way so that there would be no confusion about our generation with the generation before. We played music that had absolutely the intention not to sound like music even from 10 years earlier. Everything we did and everything that that generation did was with the idea of we're doing something new. If I were to watch a band now, a young band, let's say average age 19, 20 years old, I wouldn't see a huge difference in the way that they're dressing, the combination of instruments that they're playing, their attitude, the musical structure, the 3-chord trick, or maybe if you're lucky the 4-chord trick, or these days the 2-chord trick, or let's say the 1-chord trick. It wouldn't really sound noticeably different from any of the music I've heard in the last 50 years. Therefore, no different from the music of their grandparents. That's a fucking weird idea, that you wanted to make music and look like your grandfather and your grandmother. I mean, I would have wanted to kill myself rather than look like my grandfather, you know? Now, the reason for that is that all the images that have sprung up in the last 40, 50 years are of such high quality, they don't age, and it created a kind of stagnation. I think of it like a lake. Okay, a lake exists, let's say in a mountain. It is fed by a stream, several streams. The lake is constantly being filled up. It's also constantly draining and regenerating itself, and it is fresh. If you stop the output of the lake, you build a dam or something like that, and you just keep bringing stuff in and not getting rid of it, then at a certain point, plants start to die, there's not enough oxygen, it's called stagnation, or global warming, whatever you want. So, now I'm not proposing any kind of revolutionary solution about, you know, throw your cell phone away, or start talking to each other, or have real sex, not online sex, or, you know, because you're all kind of moving into the Spike Jones kind of culture now, all of you, whether you like it or not. And as, you know, Paul Schrader said at this conference we were doing, the audience was predominantly young, maybe a little bit, kind of your age, a little bit younger. And the first thing he said, which was interesting, was, I want to begin by saying, your brain is different from my brain. And that is socially the results of the digital revolution. That's all. I accept it, you know, and so, and I think, you know, fantastic stuff is happening. My concern is with art, let us say, first of all, is, what's the point? Why have art in the first place? And if you go back historically, there is a reason. We want to express ourselves, we want to share certain fundamental ideas about death and sex, and what's the meaning of it, is there God, and all these things. These remain constant to even the most abstract artist. And the artists that really had something to say did survive through their generation, because in a way their work was so good. And the rest quite naturally just faded away. There was a kind of natural attrition. That's the way the world functions. Paintings wither away, we die, our bodies kind of, turn into something else. So this cycle is very, very important, and what was good survived. My concern is now, there is literally, as I said before, so much crap in the lake. And how do you, if you're, let's say, 17, 18, 19, 20, aspirational, you want to be an artist, you have something to say, how the hell do you get through? And then a very wise friend of mine, Mel Agassiz, said, the future is actually, and I hate the word, curating. It's like, how do you help people to find the good stuff and avoid the other 99.9% of literally just garbage that's out there that will drag your attention, drag your time. I mean, I know we're living longer, but it's still short life, and the bit that's really interesting is the bit from, maybe 15 to, I like to think, 80, let's say, and there's a lot of very, very smart, old, wise people on the planet who actually more or less being ignored because they're not pretty. They're not good looking anymore. They are just old people, and we're obsessed with youth. Why? Because they take better photographs. Really, it's as simple as that. And so when that comes up, if you're flicking through, you see like a incredibly wise-looking old lady with white hair, a lot of wrinkles. You're probably not going to hover around on that little bit and kind of, I wonder what she's got to say. She looks interesting. It's going to be some babe or some hot dude or something, who's an artist, who has so much to say, about art. But actually, he's just a good-looking dude who wears tight trousers or something, I am cynical about it, but I also believe it to be true. So I wanted to throw this out to you, and I'm really impressed that I can hardly see any phones at all. So what do you think? It's your world. Do you think this is true? Do you think you are the victim of this saturation? And what do you personally do about it? Does it demand a revolution? I mean, the art world certainly demands one, surely, right? I mean, there is so much garbage in the art world, and there's this ridiculous kind of gallery, kind of mafia, capitalist mafia that is controlling prices, and then you kind of see who's buying this stuff, It's disgusting, it's pornographic, which means that any decent artist, what do you do to be heard? Do you have to kind of go and kind of sleep with these motherfuckers, or is there an alternative? So I'd be kind of interested to hear what people have to say about this, or if you agree, or if you totally disagree with me. Okay. Can you go start from the beginning? Yeah.
All right. I'm saying I think music right now is more exciting than it actually ever has been before.
When you say never has been before, define before.
You were saying 50 years ago, kids are 19, 20 years old, are playing in bands that look and sound exactly like their grandparents. You said something along those lines, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So I actually think that because of the internet, we are offered like a postmodern collage, a fourth world's kind of bricolage thing, where we can cut and paste and take as many influences and reference point and signposts even, references, pastiche, whatever, and use it in a way that's kind of like nuanced and unique and totally global, but at the same time you can point out the derivative reference points.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's exciting. And it's like this conversation that references the past, but it's also pushing something forward.
Mm-hmm.
And why do, I guess my question here is, just because something references a prior generation, why does that make it reductionist or boring to you?
I didn't say boring.
Or why do you say that
And I did say that there is good stuff happening. I just said there's so much bad stuff happening at the same time that the ability to spot the good stuff gets harder and harder and harder. And by the way, ironic, let's say, homage or patchworking, whatever you want to call it, it's always been a key thing in all art. So Jean-Luc Godard was doing just the same thing with American film. You know, and various kind of artists in the 60s were doing that same thing, referencing previous cultures. You have to do that. I really don't have an issue with good stuff.
Doesn't it take a smarter consumer then, or a better curator, to go digging through the constant fluff and garbage that's online and find the good stuff? So I think if you're actually kind of determined about it, the real heads, for lack of a better word, like kind of pop out.
I agree. I'm not going to argue. Yeah, I mean, like I say, maybe it's about how do you signpost your way through this. You know, they were saying it in the last talk, there's so much stuff out there. And so much of the stuff, actually, if you analyze it, is commercially based. Thinly disguised advertising, because advertising doesn't work anymore. So branding becomes such a key word, and people make the mistake of assuming that there is a connection between branding and art. Branding steals art in order to sell shit. It doesn't create art, it merely kidnaps it by saying, I'm going to pay you so much money that you're going to be wetting your pants, and then you can go off and do your art. I mean, the same way that I went to Hollywood and made Hollywood films, the same kind of seduction. And I made the mistake of thinking you could actually then do art within Hollywood, because in the past, some of the greatest films of all time have come through the studio system, but not anymore. I know that for a fact. And even the indie market is now so utterly kidnapped by the mainstream. So Sundance and Cannes have just merged into another little red carpet bullshit fest, you know? Yeah, major jerk off, you know? Like red carpet, pink carpet, go fuck yourself, you know? So,
I want to interfere something, but going back to classical music, some of the masterpieces also were commissioned by emperors. It was a wedding march, or it was like the anniversary of the kingdom, of the royal family. If you look at it, it's not much different than...
It is different in the following way. In order to write a symphonic work, which involves, let's say, from 50 to 100 musicians who have to be paid, because musicians have been...
But you're still high.
They've been consistent in this demand of being paid, God damn it. You know, therefore, you need money for that. In the same way, if you want to make a studio picture, you know that someone's going to have to pay. I mean, John Berger said a wonderful thing, which has become, in a way, my T-shirt thing. I don't know if you know John Berger. In the 60s, he wrote a wonderful book, which is worth reading, called Ways of Seeing, a re-evaluation of the arts scene. He's now in his 80s, lives in Paris. He's a wise man. He's a wonderful philosopher, and he's fantastic at talking about art. He said, you know, when I was young, I was at St. Martin's or wherever, he said, I just wanted to be a filmmaker. I loved movies. He said, and then I realized that they were expensive. And in order to pay for a film, you have to get rich people to pay for it. And he leans forward with his wonderful face and goes, and you know, I despise the company of the rich. He said, I can't bear being with them. I can't bear their conversations. They're so banal. So he said, I decided I couldn't make films for that reason, because he didn't want to hang out with rich people. So in the past with music, you had no choice. I mean, that was the only way to pay for the stuff. And that was the system anyway of art. That was the system, right? You know, commissions for a church. So somebody would do an incredibly erotic work disguised as the kind of, you know, the ecstasy of St. Agnes, and basically, you know, a totally erotic piece of architecture. So you could get away with stuff within the idea of a benevolent king or a duke or something. Once we moved into the 20th century and the democracy of like media, so anybody now can make a film, anybody can record something. I mean, the technology is fantastic. I mean, I have a studio, I have 3 computers. One is film editing, one is photograph editing, and one is music editing. And then on my laptop I do screenwriting. So I personally could not exist without the technology. The day that I learned to do my own film editing was a day, you know, thank God. I don't have to kind of explain what I want through somebody else. Digital printing, the papers that exist now, the technology of printing that exists, it's absolutely beautiful. You know, no more going to the special man and saying, I want the blacks to be blacker, and yeah, it's beautiful, but it's not quite how I saw it. You just print it, you know? So we have the tools, but funnily enough, we also have the kind of paralysis that all of this gives us too. So I find a lot of people can't move. Artists talk to me and they say, I really want to make a film. And you kind of go, and? They go, well, I just don't, I go, have you got an iPhone? Yeah. You know, I said, well, you actually have a movie camera. You can buy a little Zoom microphone, which is studio quality, and you can make a film. Do you have iMovie or whatever? Yes. Why are we having this conversation? So, but there is a kind of, I mean, somebody else said, I made a documentary recently about a piano competition, and one of the judges said, I believe there are the same ratio of geniuses per head of the population as there were 500 years ago. I don't think technology has created any more geniuses. A true innovative genius is still a rare thing. Beethoven, we remember him. Bach, we remember him. Although Bach almost vanished, which is interesting, and then I think was it Mendelssohn revived him. You know, but those, you know, Michelangelo, these key people did manage to get through the garbage gate and survive to the next generation, and so on. So, you know, those filters always worked. But now, I find that there is there's a kind of insecurity that this freedom has given everyone, you know, which is ironic, you know. I understand it, it is hard. And before we had the excuse of, you know, I really want to make a film, but I can't get the money and it's really expensive, you know. And that became a kind of like, oh, those bastards, you know, they're stopping me being creative. You take that away and there's a kind of, there's nothing stopping me from just floating out there and doing what I need to do. Then of course your problem is how do you connect that with everybody else? How do you get it to the right people? And the other thing is, how much time do you have in a day to be creative and get your shit out? Because that takes, in my opinion, more time than the creating. And more young artists I see are spending a disproportionately large amount of time social networking. They are, because Instagram is so important, it's not. You know, Facebook is so important. It's only important to the CIA, the FBI, and all the sort of police systems in the world who just love it because you just cut their workload by, they just type in the name, criminal, you know, and we just share it, you know. But it takes so much time, and so just to be a kind of pain in the ass, I went on Twitter and I decided to handwrite all my tweets, and it's called Tweet by Hand. And then I just photographed them and I put them out as a tweet, full page of handwriting. And it drives people crazy, you know. And then I realized something. I went, oh my God, I realized most people are reading this on a phone and my handwriting was already quite difficult. So I tweeted that. I said, I'm really sorry, I realize it's quite difficult. And this actor wrote back and he said, how long did it take you to work that out? Because people were writing and saying, why don't you get your secretary to type this up for you? To which I reply, you've lost the point. The point is I handwrite. Handwriting is important. If you care about what I say, you will read it, you will find something to read it on, and you'll take the time. Which is why I've got about 6 followers, right? Who read the handwriting, you know. Question? Yeah. Microphone right next to you. Hi. Do you want to turn her mic up as well? Technology's great, isn't it? She's got the mic, but no volume. Try again?
I can shout.
Oh, good. No, you got it.
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Thanks for your talk. So I feel like I'm a hypocritical youth of today where, you know, I moan about Apple and how it's like I'm a slave to it because they keep bringing out these new models. And if I don't have it, I feel like I'm detracted from my resources. Do you know what I mean? Like, I moan about the new models all the time, but then I have an iPhone, an iPad, and a MacBook because I want to feel relevant.
Yeah.
So, like, you talk about a social revolution, but I feel like if it's not a collective effort, then let's say I decide to boycott Instagram or Twitter, I feel like I'm out the loop, I'm ostracized by society, or I'm not, like, you know, in the the flow of things with my, you know, social groups or my, you know, my society. So how do you feel like the revolution could come about? Like if it's not collective, if it's individual, then it doesn't really work. So how would such a thing be organized or? Yeah.
I mean, we have the illusion that we're connected, which is a real problem. So, you know, and even I feel this sometimes, you know. Sometimes I engage on Twitter, you know, like once in a while, and then start a dialogue, and I get this warm glow, you know, like, wow, global, you know, somebody in Australia, you know, shouldn't you be in bed? And just so nice to talk. And it's like, then I kind of go, wake up, you asshole, you know. This is virtual, this is not real, you know. But there is this idea that there is a connection. I don't know, maybe in a way there is. And I see people, my big fear when I drive to work in the morning in Islington in London is that I will kill a cyclist because they're wearing headphones and they're texting while cycling, you know, and there's about 500 of them, and they're very, very aggressive. There's probably a couple of them in this audience right now. And, you know, and they can't hear you, they can't see you, they don't give a fuck about you, and you have to, in a sense, go along with their flow. So, to abdicate from that, I think is foolish, you know. But as I say to young filmmakers, well, I go back to what I said before, how do I make a film? I said, you find some people that you really like, who are quite good, but not too good at what they do yet. You know, so the idea is that 5 enthusiastic young people, and so I talk a lot to filmmakers, young filmmakers, and one of the kind of jokes I do is like, hands up who wants to be an actor, and like, wow, you know, hands up who wants to be a director, wow, you know, cinematographer, wow, you know, producer, wow, and then I go, distributor. Oh, nobody wants to go to distribution. It's such a sexy, you know, thing to do. Of course, it's not the most boring thing in the world. But unless you control distribution, you're screwed. So you can't just kind of go, oh my God, they fucked up my film, you know, the distribution was so bad. Well then, you know, it's like being a politician. You want to do it? Because the people who are doing it are not that dissimilar from the people who control the porn industry. They're maybe not the right people to be distributing this kind of work. You know, you are dealing with their taste. And they will make decisions about how this stuff goes out collectively, because we work in gangs. So you need a gang. You need a digital social media gang that's tight, attractive, sexy in a kind of arty way, you know. So it's like, that's a cool gang. That's the gang I want to be in. I don't want to be with those 10 trillion Facebook losers. I want to be in that gang. Which is exactly what Truffaut did, what Godard did, what the Nouvelle Vague did. They made a cool gang. Interestingly, when you look at the timeline, it's quite short. In the last couple of weeks, I've become obsessed with Fellini, Antonioni, Godard, the actors, Alain Delon, Romy Schneider, you know, Anna Karina, because in this period from 1959 to about 65, 66, it's already, you know, starting to go wrong. If you look at that, and you look at the literature that came out in that period, the music that was being put out in that period, it's phenomenal. So yeah, kind of, why? What was in the air at that point? I mean, I know it was post-war, and we were ready for a kind of rethink, but how come those years were so full of amazing, amazing, innovative people? I don't know what the answer is, but what I did see was that it fell off very, very quickly. So the idea of a gang, of the sexy gang that you want to be part of, seems short-lived. So the answer seems to be we need to be recreating these gangs, not out of elitism, but out of the idea of that's the best way to get creative power moving forward in whatever you do, photography, fashion. You know, I mean, fashion's fantastic, but it's such a mess right now. And one of the reasons it's such a mess is the photography is such a mess. And one of the reasons the photography is such a mess is that the editors keep choosing the same photographers, you know, so there isn't, and they keep ripping off old photographers. If I see another rip-off of Helmut Newton by Mario Testino, who doesn't credit him, you kind of go, well, that's a Helmut Newton photograph. Does no one remember? Hasn't anybody got the Helmut Newton book to actually check those references? You know, so this repetition, which is disguised as homage, but except they forget to mention the name of the person they're stealing from, you know, this is endemic in fashion now. You know, I see this, because I love fashion. I mean, when I was a closet fashion photographer when I was 15, I just didn't have the courage to admit to any of my guy friends who were kind of jerking off with Playboy and Hustler. You know, Vogue's much better. Really, and Italian Vogue and French Vogue, they're really good, you know. There's this photographer, Guy Bourdin, you should check him out, he's really hot. You know, but, you know, that innovation is just being repeated. So I see those same images, throwing a bit of heroin chic and a bit of kind of androgyny, and call it something else. Call it postmodern, call it... Does anybody know what postmodern means? I don't think so. Okay. All right, next question.
I want to ask a question, Mike, real quick.
Yeah.
Something I didn't very clearly understand is that does technology help preserving crap, or is technology directly responsible because it's occupying the artist's mind in creating crap work? Or both?
Well, we don't use the word preserving anymore, you know, because we're not intentionally preserving. We're just not we have lost the ability to flush the toilet, you know, and that used to be an organic, spontaneous thing, which is things get old, you know, and when you listen to something from a previous generation or watch it, it already looks old, so we have no problem. Let's say the family album. The family album photograph album, right? It was a beautifully made book, usually with like that nice paper in between, and they handwrite in white ink underneath on the black paper, and you would inherit your parents' photo album, right? And that would be like, and you might show that to your kids, as going, that's what your granny and your grandpa looked like. But probably by the time you pass on, your kids, we should keep grandpa's photo album. I mean, if they were kind of interested in sociology, they might keep it. But for the most part, that's the stuff that ends up in bins when they do, you know, renovations on houses. I found so many great negatives in dumpsters, you know, and you just kind of, this is tragic. Like tin boxes full of the most amazing negatives, and I printed them. But clearly, part of the natural attrition of age is you just get rid of that stuff. The problem with digital is, where does it go? It just stays. I mean, you know, people who've been abused online, the reason for the abuse being so awful if you're a woman is that whatever you do, that little sex tape is never going to go away. It will have been copied and downloaded on 1,000 porn sites and will be called something else on every other site. It will never go away. And that's one example of it doesn't go away. Neither does anything else.
But there's also a demand for that. That's also...
Well, there's a demand in any decadent culture for decadence. Because people's lives are so boring, so I understand that. They want to see film stars having sex because
the system now
makes them seem normal or
automatically...
something. Is that the answer?
Because the system now automatically flushes when something doesn't have a demand. It's all about...
It doesn't flush. I don't think, when you say flush, you mean somebody actually goes, oh, I need to flush.
I mean,
10
nobody
million
looks at
images.
it, and nobody puts it online because nobody's interested, so there's no demand for it. But they put it online because there's a huge demand for that sex tapes, whatever, the crap stuff. Otherwise, as you said, the creators or the museum owners wouldn't put it there.
Now, my point is a slightly different one. It's the look of it does not invite us to move on, because it still looks kind of, particularly now with high definition imagery, even on the iPhone is amazing. I mean, I have problems with Apple, but their stuff is good, if a little pricey, but it's good, you know. I mean, and I hate it. I love I do a photo shoot, and then afterwards I realize everyone's done little snaps on their iPhone, and sometimes they're better than mine, and it really pisses me off, you know, like, because they've already done a kind of quick, fix and high contrast, and it's looking better in black and white, and it's fucking on Instagram already, and you know, I haven't even gone back to my studio and processed the photographs yet, you know, they've done it. So that annoys me, but that's personal. But all that, yeah, I'm not going to go on any more about it, because it was an observation, and it was a, Sunday afternoon conversation, so, and I hope provocative in the sense of, like I did, I really want to think about and ponder as to why we are in the situation we're in now, which is good, and also a little worrying sometimes. I'll take a couple more questions and I'm going to shut up. Hi.
I just wanted to comment on what you said about the internet accumulating a lot of crap, which I totally agree with. And I also agree with the fact that culture is actually an elimination process of this crap. You need to filter out the good and get rid of the bad, basically. So this elimination process is, I think, what's getting all screwed up at the moment. It's both, I think, due to the internet, but also due to, for instance, nowadays you have so much more accreditation all over the place. You have so many more awards that you can apply to, and it's all becoming so commercialized. And I remember, like, back in high school, when I used to go to the film festival, I used to go and pick out the films that got the best awards. Nowadays, when you go to a film festival and you go to a movie that has got shitloads of awards, you see that actually that doesn't mean anything anymore. It's diluted, and it's I think there's an inflation also of the accreditation process, basically. I think that may be part of the problem, and I think that is what we need to look at. You know, how this how would you put it, curation or elimination is going to get better. And I'm hoping that we find the solution kind of on social media, because like nowadays things like Spotify are helping me out. You know, they're helping me find Spotify, for instance. It's an application.
Sure.
You download it and it looks at what you listen to, it looks at who you follow.
Like Amazon.
Exactly, kind of like Amazon. But for me, it's better than like reading about some group that got an award somewhere, because it's more personal and it's more kind of curated to my taste. So I don't know. What are your views on that? I don't think it's only online that's doing it. I think it's also offline accreditation.
I mean,
that's putting all this.
We haven't had a big clean out for a while. You know, I mean, God forbid that we have another world war. But from a cultural point of view, the First World War and the Second World War, which were quite close to each other, totally cleaned out the system in terms of forcing people to think about what they felt about humanity. So post-war years are amazing. A real return to humanity, you know, the desire for peace, a desire to get on with each other, and of course, human nature being what it is, that has slowly kind of totally fallen apart. You know, and as the culture gets more and more saturated, and as advertising, because of digital media, ceases to work, and then capitalism looks at digital media as being, okay, this is our new venue for advertising. So the two factors that dominate the internet now are pornography and advertising, and sometimes the same thing, because it seems ready-made for this kind of invasion. And so what comes with that are certain kind of really reprehensible attitudes towards women. And that is also sometimes endorsed by the fashion industry, who are kind of somewhat thoughtless in the way they market their wares. You know, and what comes with that is the idea that, hey, let's create a festival. Let's give out some awards. Let's invent these awards. The best, here's the award for the most innovative use of red in a fashion campaign. And the award goes to, you know, blah, blah, blah. So you can see people are just inventing awards, and then you get the award and you kind of go, wow, I have some strange awards, I tell you. And you realize you got the award because it meant you would turn up and somehow endorse. You know, and part of that is that they'll give you a nice time for the weekend, you know. The one exception, of course, being this festival we're in right now. Right? Right. Okay. Last question. So.
Hello. Hi. One possible kind of line of inquiry about the question as to why we're in the situation we're in now would be to have a historical perspective and a very analytical one, which you guys touched on, about the relationship between power and culture. And probably one salient question would be, what does culture, how does it function within, and I'm sure some people will switch off when I use these phrases, but within a capitalist system?
Yeah.
And one answer would be that you know, we are in the midst of the most extreme revolution that we've seen in human history, which is capitalism and globalization driven by capitalism, which really functions by tearing up lots of traditional relationships, family relationships, geographical relationships, in order to produce a world of both producers and consumers and free labor markets. And that if you have this world which is changing so quickly, the argument from, say, a Marxist historian might be that the excess of kind of impoverished culture that you're talking about functions as a kind of crap social glue. It's the thing that is making up for the destruction of all the other relationships that traditionally kept human society together.
In a positive way.
In a what, sorry?
A positive way.
No, not in a positive way. And I suppose going to Marx, and again, people might switch off if you talk about Marx, but he has been the most effective analyst of capitalism so far. You know, Marx talked about one of the fundamental problems with capitalism was alienation. In his view, it alienated human beings from certain good things like having an enjoyable and meaningful thing to do every day. So if you go to a factory, you do something that's repetitive, and you don't get not only the full financial, but also the kind of spiritual value of what you do. And this is a state of alienation. And in his very hazy idea of what would happen after the revolution, he conceived of culture being self-actualizing, that when people got involved with the arts, they would express themselves in some kind of free way. But you would argue that culture now is just as alienating. So instead of having real human relationships, we have relationships that are mediated through Facebook, which is obviously making a profit from it. And you can extend that model to everything from, you know.
Well, it's ultimately.
Anyway, so that's it's basically more of an observation, but a simple answer would be that having a very analytical and systemic look at what's actually happening might be the first step to trying to work out what those solutions might be.
And then finding a way to actually communicate your findings in a way that was cogent and, you know, incisive enough to actually create a difference, so that people actually went, oh, that's interesting, I haven't thought about it that way. And, you know, how do you use social media in an incisive way when attention deficit is the key genre, in a way? You know, the idea of if it's not working, just, you know, you see thumb extension. I mean, what are, you know, they say the injuries of the future are blindness or short-sightedness, thumb extension and strength, bad posture, you know, and all these kind of things just to do with this, you know. So how do you get, you know, because I'm a practical person, I was thinking, well, practically, how could you do this? Like I say, make a really good small gang that becomes attractive, and then reinvent it 2 years later so that it never becomes Apple Mac, you know, it's so sexy and so good that it just becomes rich and fat and useless in a way. Just makes nice toys, but no longer has. Because I mean, I think when I first started using Mac, it kind of felt quite political in the sense of it was an alternative to the big brother of PC. And it was so much better, and it was so much more intuitively useful to artists and so on. And they started, I mean, they invented, you know, Final Cut. Final Cut Pro revolutionized the film industry, absolutely revolutionized it. I still argue with people, they talk about Avid, which is this much more expensive, exclusive thing. So there is no difference. People talk such crap about things. And now, for example, the last thing I'll say, because I'm a filmmaker, is that I made a film in 2000 called Time Code, which was a revolutionary film. First real-time film ever made. Reason why it was possible was because of digital technology. A camera could actually shoot for 95 minutes without stopping. So I did it on 4 cameras without stopping. You know, the film created quite a kind of stir at the time, you know. And I predicted even then that because these cameras were cheap and accessible, that the industry would actually conspire to make a more expensive camera that was sexually exciting for cameramen. i.e. they could then have their crew back, and a bunch of fat guys with belts with lots of tools on, like a real film, because the frisson of terror that went through the mainstream film industry when these little cameras started appearing, and you get films like Festin being made on a camera this big, and you get the Dogma group, and you get Lynch starting to work on small digital cameras, and they were terrified, with very good reason, because the entire Los Angeles film industry is based on the idea of labor, and that means to make a film, you have to have a big budget in millions, and you need this number of people, and therefore you need these many trucks, and therefore you need the unions to kind of participate in the negotiations. So you're talking about a kind of capitalistic structure that involves a lot of people and a huge amount of money. And then someone invents a camera and kind of goes, fuck, I don't need anybody. It's actually got a microphone on the top as well, so I don't even need a sound guy, and it shoots in the dark. Wow, I don't need lights. I remember interviewing David Lynch, and he went, it's great, you just keep the camera running, and if there's not enough light, you just plug another light bulb in. And if you don't like what the actor's doing, you just say, do it again, and then hold it there. I'm going to walk to another angle, do it again. I got both my angles, I didn't stop the flow of creativity, and it's true. And that's how I made films, continue to make films, because that technology really works for the artist. So what happens? Ariflex, who must have been quaking in their boots as being the main manufacturer of expensive high-end equipment for the film industry, back into the laboratory. The Alexa, the Ariflex Alexa, just as big and just as sexy as a 35mm camera, and it needs even more technicians, and it's quite heavy. Therefore, you're legitimately making a real film again, guys. None of this kind of limp-wristed indie stuff that those guys in Scandinavia were doing. Proper movie. We'll need the trucks, we'll need the big fat guys, we'll need the catering, we'll need at least $30 million for that film. And you see these films that are being made right now, and they're contemporary, and in known locations, and you ask what the budget was, and they tell you, kind of go, holy fuck, what did you spend the money on? And then I know what they spent their money on: the trucks, the Alexa, the crew, the food. And they could have shot it on they could have shot it on an iPhone, or something not much bigger than that, and the audience would not have cared one jot about the difference of technology. As long as the sound was okay and the pitch was more or less exposed, and it's a good story, people will enjoy the film. People don't actually care about the Alexa. It's only the industry. Thank you very much.